Schizophrenia is most, by most people's account, the most severe mental illness. It's also the topic of my dissertation and my graduate work. Let's get into it. Now, what are we talking about here? We're talking about a psychiatric condition that usually has onset between adolescence and your 30s, although there are childhood versions of this, and there are also later onset versions. Some even think there are very late onset versions, although I'm more skeptical of those. In my mind, when I see 65-year-old first onset of symptoms, my mind goes to a degenerative disorder, most of which have psychotic symptoms associated with them. So, what are the components? What are the symptoms? Well, these folks have a disordered thought form. There are very loose associations between ideas. They may make sense in their mind, but from the outside, it's very difficult to try to understand what's going on. They can even be incoherent. Now, the content of their thoughts is also affected. This comes out as delusions. We'll talk about those. We also have problems with attention and perception. We have hallucinations. We have sensory disturbances. There are affective components, motivation. Social functioning is extremely affected. And there are cognitive deficits that are core features of the disorder. But, excuse, sorry. But as far as diagnosing, you need to meet criteria in the DSM. You need to have two of a set of symptoms, including hallucinations, delusions, disorganized speech, grossly disorganized behavior, and negative symptoms. One of those two symptoms must be either delusions, hallucinations, or disorganized speech. Both of them could be of these top three variety, but at least one must come from here. It's like when you're trying to fulfill your major requirements, one from this list and any of the others. So one must come from here, but your second one could be from here as well. So what are delusions? Delusions are firmly held beliefs that have no basis in fact or evidence. And when the person is confronted with this lack of evidence, they resist. Their beliefs seem to be impervious. They seem completely dead set. There are many kinds of delusions. Most commonly, you see delusions of persecution, what are commonly called paranoid delusions. These take the form of someone or something is trying to harm me, is coming after me, etc., etc. There are delusions of grandeur. I am special, gifted, powerful, superhuman, famous, wealthy, none of which are evidently true. There are delusions related to thought control, that my thoughts are being controlled, or that I can control other people's thoughts. I don't want to get stuck in the weeds, but there are many kinds of delusions. Now, hallucinations. A hallucination is a perception in the absence of sensation. That's on the stronger end of the experience. On the milder end, there are perceptions that are disturbed and don't necessarily reflect exactly what was detected by the senses. This is where a bush might look like there's an animal in it. This is where there's some ambiguous sound, and the person transforms that in their mind into something else. Now, as far as hallucinations go, any of the senses can be affected. People see things, hear things, smell things, taste things, feel things crawling on their skin. Any can be affected, but most commonly it's hearing. And most commonly, what they hear are voices, mean, derogatory voices talking down to them. A common theme across the hallucinations is that they're quite negative. They're scaring the patient or putting them down or accusing them of things. Now, disorganized speech behavior, this is this can be as bad as a complete word salad, where one word has no relation to the last or the next. But mostly it's somewhere between normal speech and that. So I think of it as almost like the patient sort of comes in and out of focus, where sometimes they're making complete sense and they're completely lucid, and then you sort of lose them, and then they're gone into their thought disorder. Grossly disorganized behavior is referring to strange, purposeless behavior that doesn't seem logical, at least to the observer, and doesn't seem to have a goal or an end point. Now, these negative symptoms, they don't sound as dramatic, but data show us that on day of admission to the hospital, the symptoms that will predict poorest long-term outcome are your levels of negative symptoms. Believe it or not, you'd rather have a patient come in completely delusional than someone who comes in completely heavily negative symptomed out. What do we see here? We see flat affect. Affect is the expression of internal emotional states. This is someone who has a very plain, flat look on their face, that looks like a smile, no matter what's going on. This might not sound so bad, but it really is, to be honest, it's disturbing when you see it. It's confusing, and you quickly begin to wonder if the person is being hostile or rude, or just what exactly is going on here, you wonder. There's often loss of speech. People's verbal output goes way down. There's also often loss of motivation, tremendous loss of motivated behavior. Related to that, just one thing I always like to mention, just to keep an eye for. In a lot of cases, one of the first signs that schizophrenia is developing, retrospectively of course, is you see that the person early on went through a phase where they stopped grooming, they stopped bathing, brushing their hair, they stopped shaving, they don't care about if their clothes are dirty or if they're stinky. Because if you think about it, laundry, bathing, all of these things require a lot of motivation. And they also require a very organized mind. We take it for granted because thankfully, the vast majority of humans have a perfectly capable mind. But if you're having trouble associating thoughts, you're having trouble regulating your behavior, and you're distracted maybe by delusions or frightened by hallucinations, things begin to fall apart, and self-care is often an early sign. I'll stop this video now, but right after you're done with this, go and watch these two videos about Gerald. Gerald is a patient with schizophrenia, probably the most widely studied patient because of these videos. So many psychology and psychiatry students have learned from this case. Go take a look. See which symptoms Gerald has, which maybe he doesn't have. What's going on? Try to test yourself with your understanding of the symptomology and see how Gerald fits and why he may have been diagnosed.